Hey guys, this is a short video going over some basic grammar skills that you should feel comfortable with and be familiar with before starting English 1101. So the first thing I want to make sure you understand are different types of sentences. You can have a simple sentence, you can have a compound sentence, and you can have a complex sentence. A simple sentence is going to have a subject, it's going to have a predicate, and it's going to be a complete thought. We also call these things independent clauses. So I love to cook is a simple sentence. Our subject is I. What do I love to do? I love to cook. Love to cook is my predicate. I love to cook is a complete thought. Desserts are my specialty is a simple sentence. Desserts is the subject. Are my specialty is the predicate. Desserts are my specialty is a complete thought. You'll notice that simple sentences always begin with a capital letter and they always end with punctuation, like periods at the end. Compound sentences are going to have two simple sentences, two independent clauses, combined together with a comma and a conjunction. And back in school, you probably heard conjunctions referred to as fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And so what you do is you have two sentences, you want to say them very quickly together, and so you use that comma and you use that fanboy to combine them together to make it one sentence. I love to cook is one sentence. Dessert my specialty is one sentence. And we combine those together with comma and to create a compound sentence. I love to cook, comma, and desserts are my specialty. Now, in order to create a compound sentence, you can also use a semicolon. You use these very sparingly, once, maybe twice in your essay, if you dare, but you use a semicolon to combine them together, and then you no longer have to have a conjunction. And you do this when your two sentences are so powerful, they need to be said all in one breath without an and or a but kind of interrupting that flow in between. I love to cook. Desserts are my specialty. Complex sentences are the most complicated sentences. And I know right now several of you are thinking, well, I just won't use them in my paper. But you think in complex sentences, and you're going to be writing inevitably in complex sentences. And they're called complex because they contain a dependent clause and an independent clause. Now, depending on where these are placed in a sentence determines if you have to have special punctuation. So if your dependent clause comes first, you have to have a comma before you move into the independent clause or the simple sentence. If your independent clause comes first, you don't have to have any punctuation to move straight into that dependent clause. And I realize that's kind of a weird phrase, dependent clause. It would have been a sentence, but you had a special word placed in the beginning. Something like because. Oh, I thought that was a circle. Something like because or until or while. So right here, because I love to cook is your dependent clause. I love to cook could have been a sentence. I added that subordinate conjunction because in front of it, making it dependent. And now that that's there, it has to be attached to another sentence, another idea, in order for it to be complete. If I walked up to someone and said, because I love to cook, they would have no idea what I'm talking about. I would look crazy. That's because it's dependent and it needs more information. Because I love to cook, desserts are my specialty. Oh, now the sentence is complete because you have a dependent clause, comma, and an independent clause all together. Now, if you look at the next example, it's the exact same idea, but it's flipped. We start with our independent clause, we end in our dependent clause, and because of that, we no longer have to have a comma, which is why complex sentences are so complicated. If it starts with your dependent clause, you must have a comma before moving to your independent clause. If it starts with your independent clause, you need no punctuation to move straight on into that dependent clause. The next thing I want to make sure you're familiar with are fragments, run-ons, and comma splices. A fragment is when you have an incomplete sentence. You usually have a piece, but not everything. You have a subject, you have a predicate, or you do not have a complete thought. So the beautiful, intelligent teacher is a fragment. It's just a subject. We don't know anything about it. And because it's not a complete thought, it's a fragment. Teaches us about writing clearly is just a fragment. It's a predicate. We have no subject. And so you're going to have to add information to fragments in order to make them complete and in your papers. Run-on sentences are the opposite. You have multiple sentences there together, but it's not punctuated correctly. It's not correct. So the teacher instructs us every Wednesday night, and we learn how to write our papers correctly. Someone was trying to create a compound sentence, but we're missing our comma, therefore we have a run-on sentence. So what you want to do is you want to go ahead and put a comma right here before your and now we have two sentences. The teacher instructs us every Wednesday night, comma, and we learn how to write our papers correctly, period. Comma splices are the opposite. You're throwing a comma somewhere that it doesn't belong, and you're splicing up your sentence. The teacher instructs us every Wednesday, comma, we learn how to write our papers correctly. In order to fix it, we have to either turn it compound and add an and. We can turn it into two simple sentences and place a period and capitalize the beginning of our new sentence. We can add a semicolon and make it compound. We could add a subordinate conjunction like since and make it complex. But our goal is always to write in complete sentences. And sometimes we have to, again, I thought I had a circle. Sometimes we have to make some revisions and changes to turn our fragments or run-ons and our comma splices into a sentence that belongs into our paper. If you want to pause the video and work through this exercise, you certainly can. If you feel comfortable with simple, compound, complex sentences, you don't have to do it. You're not turning this work into me, but I want you to have some examples and exercises if you need it. And here are some answers. You can go ahead and pause the video if you want to double check how things were fixed. But please remember, there's usually more than one way to fix something. So if you did it and you want to kind of double check that it was right and it's not what's on the screen, you are welcome to email me the original sentence and your fix, and I don't mind talking you through what works and what doesn't. Commas in a series is something very simple, but we're going to be using this a lot as we create our thesis statements. So I want to make sure you understand how to do it before we build on kind of the complex lesson. So anytime you're listing something, you want to make sure you have commas separating the items that you list. There's some argument in the grammar world over one comma versus two. We're going to go old school, and you're going to want a comma after everything you list. So as you are going through, let me change my font color. I like the colors red, green, and yellow. Well, we're listing three colors here. So I need to make sure I have a comma in between them. I like the colors red, comma, green, comma, and yellow. Eddie, Kim, and Larry went to the park. Again, we've got three people that we're listing, and we want to make sure we're adding commas in between to make our message very clear to the reader. So we want to say Eddie, comma, Kim, comma, and Larry went to the park. It seems very simple, but if you're looking at it and it's punctuated incorrectly, you could think that Eddie is one name, or that red green is one description. And so that comma there just allows the eye to see, oh, those are separate things. Again, very simple idea, but as we create three-part thesis statements, you're going to be listing three ideas, and I want to make sure you feel comfortable with this grammar. Subject-verb agreement is something that some of us as Southerners really kind of mess up when we're casually talking with friends and family. Very simply, if a subject is singular, you have to have a singular verb. If your subject is plural, you have to have a plural verb. And there really is no way to know singular and plural verbs other than memorizing them and knowing them. Most of us innately pick the correct one because we've been speaking English our whole lives. But as I said, as Southerners, sometimes we butcher this and get into bad habits. So when you look at a sentence like, the players are going to the pizza restaurant after today's game, you look at that subject, the players, and you see that there's more than one player, right? Because it ends in an S. Because there's more than one player, you have to pick, that sounds so weird. Because there's more than one player, you have to pick the plural verb to go with it. And you can look up here and see, is would have been singular, are is correct, and are is plural. We shouldn't say the players is going to the pizza restaurant. Instead, because there's more than one player, we want to say the players are going to the pizza restaurant. And our next sentence, Jane was going to go with the team, but she had chores to do. We look and we see that Jane is singular. There's just one Jane. And so we want to make sure we have a singular verb. And was is the correct one. Jane was going to go with the team. We would never say Jane were going to go with the team. That would be plural. Instead, Jane was going to go with the team is a singular verb. And just in case sentence structure is still kind of not your thing, our first example is a simple sentence. Our second example, a compound sentence. Go ahead and pause the video if you want to practice with singular and plural verbs. Again, I'm not taking these up as answers, but if you want a little extra practice, you can go ahead and pause and practice here. And here are the answers. So if you want to go ahead and pause and double check what you created, you certainly can. Pronoun usage. So there are different pronouns that you can use in different parts of a sentence. Subjective pronouns only go in the subject. Objective pronouns only go in the predicate. And possessive pronouns are only used when you are owning or possessing or holding on to something. Most of these we just pick because we know which ones go in the right place. But there may be one or two that you use incorrectly, and if I leave you notes on papers, I want you to kind of know what this terminology is. So she will come home and relax after work. She is your pronoun, and it is a subjective pronoun. She can only go in the subject. We would never say her will come home and relax after work. That's an objective pronoun. John brought her home to meet his parents. Her and his are objective pronouns. They're only allowed in the predicate. We would never say John brought she home to meet he parents because she and he are subjective pronouns. Your screaming is hurting my ears. Your is a possessive pronoun. It's telling you whose scream is it? It's your screaming. We would never say you screaming is hurting my ears. And when I say it, don't you kind of hear a toddler? You screaming is hurting my ears. But as you start to learn possession and when to use it correctly, you realize your and even my are possessive pronouns. You screaming is hurting me ears would never be correct. Here's a list of subjective, objective, and possessive pronouns. Most of you probably know the correct ones, but you may find that you use one or maybe two incorrectly, and I want to make sure you kind of see how they're sorted out. If you want to pause the video and work through some of these examples, you certainly may. If you feel confident with subjective, objective, and possessive pronouns, you certainly don't have to. And here are the answers. You may pause the video if you need to double check. And if you have any questions, you are free to email me, and I don't mind walking you through why something may be right. Appositive phrases is a more complex way of structuring a sentence. And what an appositive phrase does is it renames a noun or a pronoun. So it helps add extra information into your sentence without having to be repetitive. You will notice that an appositive phrase is always surrounded by commas because the additional information is not necessary but is helpful. So my best friend, comma, George, comma, is a talented football player. George is your appositive phrase. Your basic sentence is best friend is a talented football player. You add in that detail George to help give clarity and help give extra information. One of the 4 basic math operations, multiplication, is what we will talk about on Friday. Multiplication is your appositive phrase. It's renaming which one of the 4 basic math operations we're going to be talking about. And so as you go through it, you can see where you say one of the 4 basic math operations, and someone goes, what? And you say multiplication. See that extra detail? And they go, oh! And now they have everything they need to hear the rest of your thought. And so appositive phrases are great because it helps you add ideas together. It helps break up some boring, simple sentences. And it helps keep the information you're passing on efficient and helpful to the reader. Go ahead and pause this video if you want a little practice locating appositive phrases. And go ahead and pause this video if you want to double check what you picked to make sure you understand them. Now, appositive phrases are a little easier to pick out than they are to build. And so I wanted to have an example where you can kind of see how to use this in your own writing. Franklin Roosevelt built a little White House in Warm Springs, Georgia. Franklin Roosevelt was the 32nd U.S. president. As you look at this, you see how both sentences are simple, both sentences are kind of boring and kind of repetitive. And so if I use an appositive phrase, I'm going to help break up some of that boring repetition. You look and see, where did I name someone? And where do I give extra detail about who or what they are? So if I was going to create this in a paper, I could say the 32nd U.S. president, and then I want to add my appositive phrase, comma, Franklin Roosevelt, and now I can add the rest of my sentence. Built a little White House in Warm Springs, Georgia. And what I have done is I have taken 2 simple sentences, I have combined them together and used an appositive phrase to help give more clarity and more detail to the sentence. Go ahead and pause the video and try out number 2. And when you're ready to check your answer, you can press play. All right, so here is an example of what you could do. Remember that your answers can definitely vary. So if you did something different and you're not sure if it's right, you're welcome to email me, and I don't mind double checking it and making sure that you understand the appositive phrases. All right, well, that was a short video going over some basic grammar rules. Please make sure that you feel comfortable with these things because you are definitely going to need these as we are working through our papers and the English 1101 course, and you will find it helpful as you take your very first quiz.